Good morning. My name is Eric Frank. I'm the president of IC360. IC360 is a leading integrity and compliance technology and service provider for the sports betting, and iGaming industry. IC360 is incredibly excited to present this webinar on the topic of 2024 recap and what's on deck for 2025, primarily focused on the US market. I'd like to thank our sponsor for this webinar, Metropolitan Commercial Bank. Very much appreciate you sponsoring this event. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce your moderator for today's webinar, a highly respected analyst covering everything sports and sports betting for CNBC, Contessa Brewer.
Thank you so much for having me, and I'm so glad to be part of this. And really, it's unusual for me to be able to have this deep dive. Eric, thank you for having me. Do you want to talk a little bit about the panel that you guys have assembled to go through this today?
So, so what we have on the panel today, we have everyone knows Dave Reebok, who's former division director of New Jersey Division of Gaming Enforcement and a former colleague of mine. I am a former regulator. I spent 30 years with New Jersey Gaming Enforcement as a slot lab director towards the end of my career, and then as Dave's chief of staff. And then we also have Matt Heap, who was the chief of investigations at the Colorado Division of Gaming Enforcement. So it's great for all of us to be here, and we're really looking forward to this discussion with you, Contessa.
Yeah, I'm really happy to be here too. And it's, as I was saying, it's so unusual for me to get a chance at the regulators to talk about what's going on behind the scenes, especially because what we're seeing in 2024 is that there are so many issues that are just getting elevated and highlighted about especially responsible gambling and whether the industry is doing enough to tackle that. There are questions, and I think none more than Shohei Ohtani's interpreter being involved with an illegal gambling scheme on baseball. How do we ensure that there is integrity around sports? Are we going to see an expansion of iGaming? Right now, it's been legalized in only 7 states and 7 jurisdictions, and it continues to grow even in those places. Would we see more? And if that happens, is online gambling going to cannibalize the bricks and mortar casino gambling? What should be done about sweepstakes? I mean, at the Global Gaming Expo in October, it was the talk of the conference that there has been a proliferation of sweepstakes-based gambling and other kinds of unregulated gaming. There are questions now about whether prop bets in college is really a good idea, and we could go on and on. So we may not be able to get to all of the issues, but you have so much experience as regulators and now working in the private sector. I hope that gives you some freedom to be as candid as you want to be and explore some of these issues from 2024 and how they will inform what lies ahead in 2025. So, Dave, let me start with you, because even before I was assigned to cover gambling, you were already doing it and you saw the introduction of online gaming in New Jersey. When you look at what the challenges were there, do some of those same challenges still exist for other states today?
Thanks, Contessa, and it's a real pleasure for you to lead us here in this dialogue. The quick answer to your question is yes. It seems like light years ago when New Jersey first moved into the online casino gambling world. And in 2013, when we were charged to implement online gambling in the state of New Jersey, it was really moving from a 45-year experience, well-run retail oversight, the integrity of casino gambling in New Jersey in the United States, into this whole new area of technology, and really technology delivered through the internet to people who live in New Jersey. And so there were a lot of challenges there because, quite honestly, everything was tethered in New Jersey to the casino retail industry. Many were not prepared. Many did not want us to be successful because of what you just said. They were fear of cannibalization. They didn't have the background or experience with technology and trust of technology, even in their retail environment, to what they have today, back in 2013. So therefore, they're moving into this whole new industry, and how are we going to regulate it and be successful? And I also had a state treasurer that mentioned to us that we were supposed to generate $1 billion in tax revenue within the first year of operation. So a little bit of pressure on us. That being said, we had to look elsewhere. And elsewhere meant we had to look to Europe and we had to look to other jurisdictions outside the United States who are successfully engaged in gambling regulation. When we looked at them, we were very disappointed. We could not copy what they were doing and be successful in the United States. Our culture, our laws were different. We just couldn't copy it. They weren't, and in fact, in my opinion, their status at that time was such that we were really better regulating gambling retail than they were better regulating online. So we had to come up with a whole new mechanism, and we had to embrace technology as a tool to regulate. And I think Eric can go into greater detail on that, but certainly there were 3 areas that on online gambling that I think we've nailed in the United States now, even in sports wagering, and that is geolocation. Geolocation was you couldn't let people gambling outside your state gamble in your jurisdiction. That's behind us. We have many great groups that do that right now. Account-based KYC, you had to know everything about the person as well as the device they were going to use, and they could not be anonymous. Those systems are still being developed because every day there's ways that people are trying to beat the system and remain anonymous, which you're not allowed to do for obvious reasons. And then the last area was the payment processing area, which was you're now into e-commerce. You're into an area of technology that is not cash-based, and cash is not king. And you were very dependent on the payment processors to find e-commerce tools, credit cards, debit cards, mechanisms where banks did not trust gambling and had to come into play in order to allow the revenue to be verified where it was coming from, as well as how it was being used and where it was going. So with that, I would say that, yes, we have some things we do really well. But even today, as states continue to grow and learn, there's things that we can do better. And technology, if we embrace technology and use these programs that are being developed now by those who want to assist in integrity practices, then I think we're going to be better shape in the future.
Eric, what's the slot lab?
So the slot lab, from 2008 to 2016, I was the director of the slot lab, right? So what we do is we ensure the integrity of all the electronic gaming equipment that's used in New Jersey. Every other jurisdiction around the country today pretty much relies on an independent test lab to do their testing. In New Jersey, we don't. We have our own independent test lab, and that's what I was responsible for. And so whether it's a slot machine, whether it's a progressive, whether it's an electronic table game, anything that has an electronic component, which today almost everything does, is the responsibility of the slot lab in New Jersey. And they have, when I was there, it was 40 people working in it. I think we're up to 60 now. And Dave talked about the challenges. I think in 2013, it's probably the most fun I had as a regulator of my life. I mean, just getting ready to be launched. We talk about challenges, and he's right. People wanted us to fail. But another big challenge was we had to get it done in 9 months, right? We had to ramp up very, very quickly. And we talk about the research that we did. I can remember having, France, Albany, Spain, Italy, Denmark, all their regulations on my desk and highlighting the ones that we thought might work for us. And then the whole team got together. It was a team effort to do it. But what came out of that and what allowed us to be successful is by having our own private test lab, having the experience going back to the 70s when we launched in Atlantic City. But there's things that we take for granted today, and they've mentioned a couple of them. I mean, geolocation was completely new. We knew that it worked, right? If you remember having a Garmin in your car or some device where you were driving around and you wanted directions, it would say, drive in 30 feet, you make a right. So we knew the technology was there and there was a high level of granularity available. The challenge was those products weren't designed to prevent spoofing and things like that, right? Why would you want to spoof your location when you're using it to get to somewhere, to get to a destination? So that was a big challenge. And honestly, GeoComply was the first to really be able to get it done. Today, there's other people in the market doing it as well. But some of the other things he talked about, cybersecurity was a big issue for us. We developed our own cybersecurity team. We brought in somebody from the NSA, believe it or not, to help us with that. We were the first jurisdiction to require annual security assessments. That was brought in as part of the online gaming initiative in 2013. We had to deal with KYC issues. Responsible gaming, we were the first to develop an online responsible gaming. You were able to sign up to self-exclude. So a lot of things happened in 2013 that were a challenge and it really set the stage for 2018 when we overturned PASPA, because we had the foundation. We had the regulations to allow for us to address those issues. Obviously, there's other issues with regard to sports betting that had to be addressed, but the foundation was there.
So, Matt, when you're in Colorado and you're looking at all the groundwork that New Jersey had already laid, how did that then apply to what you were doing in Colorado, and how easily Colorado could incorporate some of that on sports betting that New Jersey had already done with sports betting and iGaming?
Absolutely. Our first stop, quite frankly, as a team was to go out and visit Director Rebuck and his team for about 3 or 4 days and just soak everything in as a sponge and figure out what we had facing us, because we had the same concerns, and then obviously had the curveball, the pandemic thrown in as we were trying to launch and sending employees home and trying to figure out how that works while you're trying to launch a brand new regulatory framework. But the one thing that we experienced that immediately was something brand new, and both Dave and Eric touched on it, was the technology piece that didn't exist with what we were needing to do to this degree with the 33 brick and mortar casinos in Colorado. And having to be able to get up to speed and understand how that all worked was something that they really drove home to us, that I think was probably one of the most critical pieces that we took back. And let's face it, as many jurisdictions did, we took what New Jersey had already laid down because it was working so well, and we copied quite a bit of what they did, because they had already experienced the ups and downs and what you needed to do. So we immediately had to change kind of our method of how we hired people, what kind of skill sets we were looking for, what level of expertise did we need to obtain in our staff, and the education that we need to help training and everything else that we need to help build their backgrounds. We had less than 10 people to stand up something that needed to be launched within months, and we had to do it with roughly 25 plus online sports betting operators that wanted to start May 1st. And because of the things that we learned in New Jersey and a few other places and holding stakeholder meetings with the industry, we really were able to get to that benchmark and meet that deadline. And, we're able to successfully launch but had those challenges, behind us that we had to work through with all the licensing things that you need to do that take months. And it really made us adapt and kind of utilize the technology as kind of a force multiplier for not having the amount of staff that we needed to. And kind of it's exactly, where we've led the IC360 team with the level of expertise and technology tools that we've developed. It's kind of been to add to that.
To me, like the sports books themselves, GeoComply, that there is a reliance on the industry participants to monitor, regulate, report to the regulators. I mean, Dave, do you think that the regulators are outgunned when it comes to all the ways that cheating could happen, whether intentionally or unintentionally?
No, I don't think we were outgunned. I think when we move into sports wagering, I mean, there's a big difference between sports wagering as an authorized game and online casino, which essentially is redundant to what has always been played on a casino floor. We had a lot of expertise on how people cheat. and scam and engage in wrongdoing on the casino floor. And then you just monitor that in a way that, okay, could be done online also. Moving into sports wagering, now you're into a whole new type of game that we needed to learn a lot about, and we need to get up to speed quickly. And there's two areas there, I would say, Contessa, that still remain challenges, but we're doing better and better. And one is, Matt touched upon it, match fixing. The content providers are the leagues, the teams, the NCAA, every possible sports wagering group you could think of that wants their activity to be wagered on. We made them come to the table with us and pre-approve their integrity plans before we even put their content up. And then also had lines of communications with them and partnerships where they understood we have so much data that's going on with regards to your contest that we want to be able to share that with you when we have a suspicion of wrongdoing, but we want you to be in a position to monitor your employees, your athletes, your people engaged, and we will help train you and educate them on the risks that they're involved in, because they are at risk to be abused and used. And that was a biggest change. We had to work with content providers in ways we had never worked with people before in improving their contest before they could go up online to be wagered on. And again, we couldn't do it all ourselves. The massive explosion in sports wagering in the United States resulted in the need for others in the private sector to help and work with, giving the two teams and leagues tools to monitor their player behavior and work and educate them and have them publicly aware of the risks they were at. And I'm very pleased to announce that I think the industry, the non-regulatory industry, has picked up the pace and really used them. And we have situations, as you mentioned, with Otani. Okay. That's a primary example. That was not engaged in illegal gambling. I mean, engaged in a legal gambling site. That was an illegal bookie monitoring or taking, basically, the availability to manipulate this individual in ways that are
Totally. And that was something that could have happened a decade ago and didn't need any of the But John Tay Porter, and there's been other, college football players, the San Diego Padres players. It's interesting that you mentioned match fixing, though, because Sport Radar literally just sent me within the last hour a note that said they have a report, they've compiled this report that indicates a 17% drop in match fixing from 2023 to 2024, that the worst of it in Europe saw an even greater decline. So when we're looking, I don't know, Matt, when we're looking at insider information, bettors who are not supposed to be betting, match fixing, what's IC360 doing to ensure the integrity in sports?
Well, I mean, it's a holistic approach. And I think the stats that you refer to from Sport Radar is indicative of getting things out in the open, dealing with them with technology and tools and safeguards, whether it's the integrity monitoring of each event, the data analytics, the education component that goes into educating those who are prohibited from doing certain things. And ProAbet, which is what we launched back a couple of Septembers ago, that was designed exclusively to try and fill this chasm that existed in every state's regulations about individuals that are identified as prohibited from participating in either certain types of wagering, or let's say it's in the collegiate institutions, basically for 95% of the markets that are offered. There was never a way for those list type providers that have these sports properties and schools to upload their information so that the sports books, the fantasy operators, anybody else participating on the back end could cross-check that information securely and safely and find out, do we have somebody in our midst that shouldn't be doing this stuff? And I think the Sport Radar statistics, there's probably a lot to go into why those numbers have dropped. but it is due to the fact that technology is now being used. And we have come up with it. For those that aren't really aware, just a real quick, a high level overview of what Proabet is. It is the safe, secure data encryption transfer using one-way cryptographic hashing that schools and pro sports leagues
I don't even know what that means. You just said it
really basically
that I don't
means
understand.
that information that they have on their prohibited sports betting participants, whether it's administrative staff, student athletes, players, coaches, referees, anybody defined in regulation or statute that should not be betting on certain activities, the information needs to be exchanged, and so that the cross-reference can be done by the sports betting operators and fantasy operators to ensure that their patrons are not one of these individuals. Well, the technology that we use for this is basically encryption. That's a one-way encryption. That information never leaves their servers in an unsecured manner, so they're not sharing PII, personal identifying information. And then it sits in our server in an encrypted fashion that cannot be reversed back to its original data points: name, date of birth, social security number, driver's license, so on and so forth.
So it can't be hacked.
Yeah, it cannot be. It cannot be reverse engineered back to that. It would take hundreds of years basically to take that information.
Well, that gets us into quantum computing, and again, that's beyond what I understand.
Exactly. And so basically that sits in our server in a hashed, encrypted format, and it's just a massive list of names. We have hundreds of thousands of names in there right now. And then a sports betting operator or fantasy operator who's ever contracted to check against that will either do it during the KYC process, or when somebody's attempting to make a wager or creating an account or signing into their account. And then an alert based on matching logic would get generated and send it back to, the University of XYZ and sports betting operator XYZ, that they need to communicate with each other to put the brakes on that transaction before it's allowed to continue. And then we find out 13 months later that somebody's been betting, $25,000, $30,000 on stuff that we can stop at the very first transaction. And so Eric, the reason I bring that up, it's one of the products that we have in our suite of products. That's the holistic overview of compliance related and helping regulators, helping the industry, helping the sports properties, ensure integrity from the very get-go. And, without those technological tools, we would not be seeing a drop. There is obviously a correlation to all of that and the use of technology by everybody involved in the ecosystem.
Eric, are the schools receptive?
Yeah, so we talked about the technology behind it, but one of the other things that we do is that we proactively go out and reach out to schools and make an effort to educate athletes, students, coaches, anyone involved in the sports gaming industry, or from a school, not only just the athletes, but also just the students. And last year, over the past 6 months, IC360 has gone out and visited 31 schools. We've reached over 8,700 athletes, students, like I said, people in those educational institutions. And what we do is we talk about gambling issues. We talk about responsible gaming. We talk about challenges that athletes face that are unique to them and what they can expect. And that effort's led by Dan Trolero and Ryan Tatusco, who have, personal experience with regard to being athletes and also having gambling problems. And students relate really well when we reach out with someone who has experienced these issues and is able to tell stories and to be able to bring it to life rather than just giving statistics and telling them what they can and can't do. And we get tremendous amount of feedback, and it's very, very important to reach, these people at a young age to address
how young is too young, do you think? Like how soon?
I really believe that we could reach out, and there may be an initiative in the near future to do that, to reach out to even to the high school level before they become of age to start gambling, at least being able to play fantasy sports. I mean, you can do that at the age of 18. So it's an all-encompassing educational process that we provide these students, and it's very, very effective.
Well, I got to tell you, one, I know there are a lot of kids younger than 18 who are playing fantasy sports. I know that personally. And two, I know there are kids who are gambling because maybe like drinking, their parents don't see it as a problem and allow their kids access to the parental accounts. And that's and so what happens is there's a slew of real concern building in the nation about the onslaught of gambling and whether it's destroying the fabric of America. I hear that all the time. Now you're seeing class action lawsuits filed. For instance, DraftKings is facing a slew of class action suits arguing basically that its sports books are designed to keep people gambling habitually, if not addictively. And I think we're likely to see more accusations pop up about that. So, Matt, do we have soaring numbers? Dave, what are you seeing? Like when you're now advising the AGA as well,
right?
How concerned are you about? I mean, I'm a journalist. People who lose their livelihoods, their homes, and their families, it's a far more compelling story than people who have fun gambling and do it responsibly.
And I don't disagree with you, Contessa. And so I think what we're facing in our country right now is an explosion of gambling in many ways across the country, whether it's, well, we know it exists in every sports wagering, for example, or all forms of gambling I'm talking about exist in every state today. Maybe not legal, but certainly illegal. And I spoke to this in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee and tried to have them understand that, responsible gambling, if you just focus on the risk of gambling with sports wagering online, we will, as a country, fail to deal with problem gambling to people who experience a mental disorder or an addiction from gambling. It has to be looked at holistically. This is an approach that is being dealt with right now in New Jersey. It's the first time Governor Murphy has done this, and I am optimistic. I'm not there anymore, but I am optimistic that they're going to set a trend here to take a look at responsible gambling in a way that has never been looked at across the board. And so that's one point. It's not saying, I would say as a regulator, and dealing with responsible gambling and sports wagering, that sports wagering and what we have done to enhance responsible gambling practice, to reduce the risks of people falling into a mental disorder or an addiction, are greater today than any other form of gambling that exists in the United States legally. It is. Can it do more? Yes. Through collaboration, evidence-based research, and steps are already being taken to use technology to
pardon my interruption. Let me just point out though, what you often hear the industry say is that the levels of addiction, they never call it addiction, they call it problem gambling, but that the levels have remained steady. The thing is, if you've jumped, now I'm just pulling those numbers out of thin air, but if you've jumped from 15% of the population ever placing a sports bet in a year to 60% of the population placing a sports bet in the year, then that means a lot more people, even if it's 2% or 3%, it means a lot more people are experiencing addictive gambling.
Yes. And when you look at every study that's been done in the world on problem gambling rates, okay, and we'll call it I call it addiction. People in the federal government only reference it as a mental disorder and not an addiction. But let's call it what it is. I don't care if it's a mental disorder or an addiction. Problem gambling, people who are susceptible to being addicted and harming themselves or harming their family members, is substantially lower as a percentage than everybody engaged in gambling. And why is that? I don't know. And when you look at the public health community, I would suggest that what they need to do, and the federal government spends nothing on research associated with the causes of problem gambling. and how to treat people and how to rehabilitate them, is essentially to look at that small percentage of people, and it's harmful. I get it. I'm not saying to ignore it. Why is it that virtually every study indicates that well over 90% of the people engaged in gambling don't experience a mental disorder and addiction? What factors are driving this to occur? How can we deal with it? How can we identify it? And how should we, in the future, have best practices in place to bring that number even further down? I don't have the answers to that, but what I'm suggesting to you is that just because more and more people have the legal right to gamble, I'm not so certain that their legal right is in direct correlation to those who are struggling and have an addiction. Intuitively, I hear what you're saying. Yeah, well, only people in Nevada that gambled on sports in 2018. Now 39, 40 states soon will have legal gambling, so people can have that. I agree. I
Could I
agree.
jump
But
on
let's
on
look
that,
at
Dave?
that in ways that okay, maybe we should be looking at things also. What other steps to protect people? Why are people allowed to gamble at the age 18? The maturity, social maturity, the emotional maturity, and neurological development of an 18-year-old high school student is substantially different than a 21-year-old young adult. And I can point to numerous areas where 18-year-olds are allowed to gamble legally, and they will gamble. And then they will push the envelope to do even things that are illegal. So
I just
a
wanted
lot
to
of
make
big
one
issues
point,
there to
Contessa.
look at, Contessa.
Yeah.
Contessa, one of the things you brought up too about the numbers, right? I just like to point out that regulated gambling brought tools and data that helped those who might have otherwise been unreachable, right? It brought these things to light. The increase in the use of responsible gaming tools and services is evidence of the regulated market success. You know, I think that it's evidence that what we're doing is working. There's all kinds of tools that are available now that didn't exist prior to legalized gambling.
Who let the dogs out? That's
Yeah.
There's a song that goes along that.
Yeah, I think to end that discussion, Contessa, that essentially I believe that the regulated industries, particularly in sports wagering, and there's less of them involved in online gambling, they recognize that the Achilles heel of their sustainability and success is their ability to effectively and efficiently put in practices through technology and other means with human beings interacting with individuals who are gambling to reduce the risk of problem gambling ever occurring by taking steps for responsible gambling reform that allows for early identification that's personalized, individualized, and seamless, because in online, we know everything about the gambler. Everything.
Matt, how far off is a national self-exclusion program?
Well, I'll let others answer that one.
I don't know how far off it is, but what I can tell you is I think the momentum is rapidly increasing with people recognizing that there is a need for this with the proliferation of the online space, as you've alluded to, and the different issues that are kind of increasing as we go along. And the good thing about that is that there are tools that are available readily right now. I mean, we meet with regulators all the time. I spent the last 5 or 6 months doing nothing but meeting with regulators to try and see where they are at with their self-exclusion programs and the types of things that we might be able to partner with to try and make that maybe a regional and then a national model. And, the need is absolutely there because, to your point about how things have kind of exploded in this space and the different issues that it's creating because of the ease of access on your phone. And if we don't have a national self-exclusion program sometime in the near future, we're going to have more and more people falling through the cracks and not providing them with the tools that they desperately need at a time when it's critical in their life and their family's life to be able to go in and stop playing on a specific website, and that is universal across the country. And the mechanisms are there, the technology is there. This is something that's near and dear to my heart because the Pro-Bet, it's exactly one of the reasons I came to IC360 is because I know as a former regulator, the patchwork, antiquated processes that are out there, and the people are having to walk into casinos to self-exclude. I mean, it's insane that we're still doing things like that. And so the whole intent of Proabet was to always move it into this self-exclusion space. And we are doing that now and building that centralized product in Ontario. So my hope is, as we continue to compete for these different RFPs and RFIs that are happening here in the US, that gains traction and this technology is utilized so that if I'm having an issue where I need to go in and stop, I can do it right now on my phone, and I can't go in and go to any online casino, any online sports betting platform. And that at least is helpful as one of the steps that has never existed before, quite frankly.
But the really tragic stories of the people who are slipping through the cracks gets the attention of journalists. It gets the attention of lawmakers. And we're starting to hear in Washington, D.C., some noise about regulating gaming, even though it's not a federally regulated industry. Not only Representative Tonko out of New York, and I've talked to him, a number of times about his proposals, but also the letter that got sent to the Department of Justice asking the agency to investigate whether FanDuel and DraftKings are participating in anti-competitive, sort of antitrust issues. Dave, what do you see here? Do you think that the federal government has an opportunity, a responsibility? Is there a way that you see that the federal government starts to get involved and crack down on this industry?
Well, I think I agree with you. There's people in the federal government that clearly wish to get more involved in oversight and regulation of gambling in the states. I mean, that's very clear. My position has been all along that I've already identified one area that the federal government needs to step in. They have the tools, they have the public health agency, and they need to begin process of making a commitment to understand what the root causes are for people who are going to suffer from gambling addictions, even though they may not want to call it a gambling addiction. They call it disorder. Same to us, as I think you've highlighted. The second area is you've highlighted, what I would highlight where they need to get involved, and the states have desperately reached out to them and asked for their support. And you know this from the AGA letter that I signed on to, essentially the Justice Department to Health Services enforcement of dealing with the illegal sites that are prevalent in the United States, involved in, even in New Jersey, where we have probably 89% of our sports wagering people gambling on legal sites. There's still a significant number that gamble on the illegal sites. And the component to that is, does the federal government really choose to get involved with big data companies to look at what tools these big data companies have that can be utilized or should be utilized to block, to restrict, to disable, to reduce the opportunity of someone easily going to their website tonight and essentially finding an illegal site and gambling within minutes. I realize that that is a big discussion item when you deal with the internet companies. They're going to say it's not their content. They're going to say that, this is censorship. They're going to say,
or they say
violates.
Even when we ban an IP address that's associated with an offshore site, the offshore sites will just change it, and it kind of becomes this game of cat and mouse, a tongue-in-cheek. Like the offshore sites are like, whatever, we know how to do this anyway. And then on top of that, to the south of New Jersey, Pennsylvania courts just said, nope, there's no law in Pennsylvania that prohibits skills-based games, so go for it. Predictions markets, which what we saw was they essentially allowed gambling on elections, were permitted by federal court because Kalshi went in and argued it's not gaming, and then went in New York and said, hey, you want to see the betting odds, live betting odds on the election? But that because it falls under the CFTC's purview, which is federal, it means that the state regulators, it doesn't matter what they think of it.
Right. And again, that if what you said, that's a 1936 law. We didn't have the internet then, and they need to change the law, and they need to deal with it in ways that they have never considered. because I would say back in 2014, 2015, 16, 17, election wagering was in the UK and all these countries in Europe, and they wanted it in the United States big time and approached New Jersey through our online casino laws and said, we want it, we can do it. Mate, it's flipped the switch. And we said, no, mate, we don't do that here. That's gambling. You go to the legislature and try to figure out a way if they want it or not. And very creative entrepreneurs using technology, using the internet, have come up with a new way of circumventing essentially gambling restrictions in the states on electioneering. And
it's not just that. If you look at, you can go to crypto.com today, go under their sports tab, and it has matchups where people can make trades on the Super Bowl and who's going to win the Super Bowl. Now they can't do the parlays, which are so popular, but because of the loophole being exploited by Kalshi and Predicted and others through the CFTC, it's opened the door here.
Yes.
Matt, do you see that as a problem, or do you see it as just an innovation that legislators can either permit or not permit, or the federal government can permit or not permit as it sees fit?
I mean, I kind of see it as both. It's an innovation that's turning into a problem that has to be addressed with legislation. And the problem with that is, regulators have no say on most of this stuff because it just doesn't fall within their purview or jurisdiction. And legislative efforts to get that kind of put back inside of the tent there so that we all can kind of start wrapping our hands around it is the difficult part because of how long that takes. In the interim, I think it is fair to say, I don't know if you can paint the entire industry of the sweepstakes and everything else with one broad brush, because we know for a fact we have certain clients that come to us in that arena that are looking to proactively implement things with responsible gaming, with not letting, student athletes come on their sites and bet. And, I guess the short answer to that is, yeah, legislatively, something's going to have to be done because every, year or two, something new comes along that you're going to have to continue to deal with. The fact of the matter is it moves so fast. A regulated government entity cannot keep up with that at the speed that it changes and new things coming on board. It's absolutely the type of things that we are hopeful that we can try and augment and fill that gap or that bridge until there is sufficient regulation around how those companies can conduct themselves, what kind of rules and responsible gaming and security and everything that goes into that. We are trying to insert ourselves in there in a compliance-minded, integrity-minded way, because all of this can impugn the overall integrity of the entire framework within our country. And we certainly can't allow for that to get too far out of hand.
We have 2 minutes left, and because I work in TV, I'm a stickler for sticking to time. Because the folks who've joined to talk about, I'm sure, this look ahead. I just want you to do a quick round robin. What's the number one issue you think that the U.S. gaming industry has to grapple with in 2025? Matt, let's start with you.
Well, I think we talked about it, and I think what we're going to see is policy stuff for the next 18 months at least, whether it's legislative, talking, these type of engagements, Senate hearings, whatever the case may be. And I see the focus really back to one of your points is really the one core principle that all of this affects ultimately is the responsible gaming, consumer protection, consumer confidence, and this being an industry that people have faith in, and then when there's needs, they're going to be addressed because harms that may come with it. I see that as kind of the central focus, probably leading the way here for the next, at least 12 months.
Eric?
Yeah, I agree with Matt. I think that the focus is going to be on technology and laws related to technology. Technology is vastly outpaced existing laws that exist today. Whether you're talking about AI or you're talking about what we just talked about with sweepstakes and skill and some of the other people that are out there in the market that have found innovative ways to provide a gaming experience without having to be regulated. So I think that's going to be a hot topic and it's going to continue into the new year.
Dave.
I think they've highlighted them both. To me, the two biggest issues are understanding what is available through the internet, that it's either gambling, quasi-gambling, or not gambling, and whether or not it should be regulated, licensed, and legalized in a traditional way. And the second is no one can miss the focus on what is driving concern in our country is individuals who are susceptible to harm. And we need to do a better job to identify that problem's root causes and put resources to help those people who truly will never, ever be immune from an addiction of this degree, no matter what the source of their gambling is. So those 2 points, I think, will drive more and more to discussions here in the U.S. this year and remain hot topics.
Dave, Matt, Eric, I have to say it was a first for me. I heard the words fun and regulator in the same sentence. Thank you so much for letting me be part of the conversation. It's informative for me and helps me as I, try to grapple with the stories and the coverage of gambling in 2025. Happy New Year. Thank you to everybody who joined in. It was really a pleasure to have you. And I've been asked to thank the sponsor here as well, Metropolitan Commercial Bank. Hope everybody has a great day.
You too. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.